Good afternoon. Today's speech, we are going to be talking about how No Child Left Behind Act has not been implemented correctly. My purpose is to inform my audience about the No Child Left Behind Act and how it has not met the needs of and standards of students in the United States. While most of you may be unfamiliar with the No Child Left Behind Act, the goal of this Education Act was to develop student assessments of basic skills. The primary benefit of the No Child Left Behind Act was that it allowed each state in the U.S. to develop their own achievement standards. It placed an emphasis on annual testing for these skills, tracking academic process and progress for individual students, and improving teacher qualifications. These changes made No Child Left Behind controversial, but they also forced schools to focus on the disadvantaged kids. Note, the No Child Left Behind Act is no longer the law. In 2015, this act was replaced by Every Student Succeeds Act, which tried to address some of the criticism of the law. While most of you are unfamiliar with how the No Child Left Behind Act affected students and educators, today I will inform you on the pros and cons of the act. It serves us all well to expand our horizons and learn about education and how different laws and acts can affect the students and educators in our country. It's important to be informed on how your child is being educated and make sure your child does not get left behind. Although the No Child Left Behind Act was replaced in 2015, there are still pros and cons to examine within this act because many students and educators were left confused and enforced by states to continue implementing the No Child Left Behind Act. Today, I'd like to share with you the pros and cons of the Act and how it has negatively and positively affected our students and educators and why the Act is no longer in effect. To begin with, I will give you a brief explanation of what the No Child Left Behind Act stands for. The major focus of this Act is to close student achievement gaps by providing children with a fair, equal, and significant opportunity to obtain a high-quality education in a public school system. No Child Left Behind Act was the main law for pre-K through 12th grade education in the United States from 2002 to 2015. The law held schools accountable for how kids learned and achieved throughout the school years. There are many pros and cons of the No Child Left Behind Act and how it affected our students and educators. According to the No Child Left Behind Pros and Cons article, the primary benefit of the No Child Left Behind Act was that it allowed each state in the U.S. to develop their own achievement standards. It placed an emphasis on annual testing for those skills, tracking academic progress for individual students, and improving teacher qualifications. Here are some No Child Left Behind pros of the Act. What made the Act good? It held teachers and administrators accountable for student performance. It gave parents a better understanding of their schooling options. Parents realized that they had more options for their students than their assigned school based on their address. According to the article, parents of the less fortunate children could be able to understand how their children are doing at school, and at the same time, they can understand how that school system works. It offered a plan to get parents on board and to keep them interacted with their students, their children in class. However, the No Child Left Behind Act improved student test score tremendously. The test score for minority students have shown some of the highest level of growth since its first implementation. The No Child Left Behind Act gave an advantage for minority students. By providing minorities with an equal learning experience, students can learn more about each other, different cultures, ethnicities, and the safety of their classroom. Now that you are familiar with the pros of the No Child Left Behind Act, I'm going to give you some of the cons of the No Child Left Behind Act. Allow me to tell you why the No Child Left Behind Act is no longer a federal education act in the school systems. To begin, the act forced states to identify schools that were failing according to standardized test scores coming from their students. The act was also unfunded to the states. It did not help pay for anything they required. After much debating and 13 years later, the No Child Left Behind Act had came to an end. It was done. And a new law called the Every Student Succeeds Act was enacted on December 10th of 2015, and this replaced the No Child Left Behind Act and eliminated some of the most controversial provisions in education. As I previously mentioned, I'm going to explain some of the cons of the No Child Left Behind Act. Some of the best students in the classroom were often ignored and left behind. It may sound crazy, but if students were passing the standardized tests that they needed for the No Child Left Behind Act, they would assume the students no longer needed the attention, and the focus because they had already passed the test, so they were focusing on the students that weren't passing to get them at the acceptable level. It created teacher shortages in many states, and small children do not always perform well on standardized tests. Although the No Child Left Behind Act was very effective for education in the United States, it did open a new perspective on education and the importance of making sure that no child gets left behind. To conclude, states are still required to report on the progress of undeserved kids and all students in a public school system, including the special education students. The No Child Left Behind Act was replaced with Every Student Succeeds Act and still requires annual testing, accountability, and authority. Now that you are familiar with the pros and cons of the No Child Left Behind Act, you will have a better understanding of the importance of children's education. It's important that all students are offered the same equal opportunity to succeed in school. Thank you.